Hey everyone, welcome to Magnetic, a podcast where we explore passionate brand communities and the people that helped build them. Today, super excited, we have a good friend of mine, Bryant Knight, who will be on today to explain a little bit about Malbon Golf and how they built such a passionate brand community. Bryant, thanks so much for being on. Would love to get a quick introduction for everyone that's listening who might not be familiar with you or Malbon.
Yeah, so look at for the last, I want to say almost 15 years now, I've been working in the apparel space, building fashion companies. Prior to Malbon, I was running a brand called Stamp as the operating partner of it. We built it up to a pretty decent sized business. And yeah, man, pretty much doing the same thing with Malbon now as pretty much the operating partner of the business. So yeah, for the last 15 years, really just focused on the apparel niche and, on the D2C space and, building in this little category.
That's awesome. Did Malbon find you? Did you find Malbon? How did you kind of cross paths with them?
So it goes back to, I'll take you through like a little bit of the origin story. So I wasn't the big golfer. Stephen Malbon, he was the really big golfer behind the brand. And he'd been really passionate about it for years, and he has a background in marketing. He had a magazine before called Frank 151. He started posting on an Instagram account, and it was more of like, think of it as like his personal mood board, right? Golf was really like, pretty stagnant for the most part, and he was just posting images that resonated with him, and that led into him opening up a brick and mortar shop on Fairfax in Los Angeles. If you're familiar with the streets, really close to like where Supreme is. So pretty much not like your typical, we'll call it golf destination, right? To see a golf brand there. But logically, I think it made sense, right? Because Malbon today is really a golf brand that's more of a lifestyle brand. I will say it's like more rooted in golf, right? Mm-hmm. But when I connected with Steven and Erica, it was through some mutual friends, and I went by the shop, and it was a very small shop, not too much, space to merchandise product. There was no Malbon branded product at the time. There was a golf simulator in there, and it kind of reminded me going in there of like a vibe of, I grew up like skateboarding, and I, like after school, I'd like go hang out at the skate shop and everyone would be there. And you kind of saw a bunch of people just hanging out, hitting golf balls, right? But there wasn't too much product, but it was more just like a cool vibe. And I could see some potential there, right? So when I connected with Steve and Erica, they had a really good vision behind the brand, and there was natural synergy between my background on the operating side of the business. And so that's really where we connected. And then, fast forward to where we are today, a lot has changed, right? So at that time, it was like, all right, what do we do now, right? We have to move away from selling other product, be more vertically integrated, figuring out how to, start manufacturing our own product. And that's a long process, right? You can't do that overnight. You got to really set up the fort, which takes about a year to do. So that's really where we connected. And like I said, it was natural synergy. And, that's how we basically became partners.
And I know that Malbon has a very specific kind of style. I know when we've talked before, you described it as sort of this drop model. You've been kind of executing on this drop model of launching new product consistently and constantly. Can you talk a little bit about what that means, and how Malbon maybe embodies sort of that model of product launches?
For sure. And, look, this is like pretty much as a brand, like one of the most important things that we do, right? And even in the very beginning, it was building up a drop calendar where in fashion, it's like you're creating moments, right? It's really different than say like a health and wellness product where you might have 5 SKUs and you're really just betting on people to renew it because it's something that they need. Whereas in fashion, it's like, hey, you're trying to create some sort of urgency between why they should buy the product, right? And obviously that has to resonate with them. So going back, that same methodology I've been doing for years, right? Back to when, we built Stamp, out of the garage. It's how we started, right? Just by testing out, making a few products, dropping it and seeing how it resonated with the customer. And then going into back to Malbon, we tested it out for the first time really with our Nike partnership. And And that was like a unique partnership. I'm sure a lot of people listening to this, if they're familiar with the brand, they've seen a lot of the Nike drops we do, and they're probably like, how are they doing this so often, right? And we have a pretty special partnership with them where we can go and embroider on existing Nike product. And that's really when we tested out this model on Malbon for the first time. And it was kind of a moment where we're like, okay, there's something here, right? We sold through the product really quickly. We could see that there was a huge demand there. And then it was just now filling in the gaps, right? Making sure we're staying consistent. So going back to, setting up the fort and getting some, vendors that could, create and produce our own product. Now it takes time. And then once we got the production calendar in place and things were flowing, now we're dropping product at least twice a week, sometimes even 3 times a week, which is super aggressive. And a lot of, people might not, understand, be like, how are you doing this? It's like, keep it very simple though at the end of the day. It's like, just repeat the process and continue to get product to the customer that they want.
Yeah, that's really interesting is what you mentioned about getting product into the customer's hands and then kind of iterating. Is that a big part of what you guys do where you're very reactive, or do you have sort of like a consistent calendar where it doesn't change? You're going to launch those products and then maybe later on based on customer feedback you change, or is it in real time where it's like, hey, you drop it, you kind of talk with your customers or maybe engage with them about how they're feeling about it, and then maybe that molds your next drop? Can you talk to me a little about how that dynamically kind of evolves over time?
Yeah, in the beginning, it wasn't necessarily we're talking to the customer all the time, but paying attention to like what they're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think we were necessarily making like more course focused product. It was like we're a lifestyle brand rooted in golf, so it was like, all right, this product can be worn on course, but it could also be worn like out to dinner, right? Or to an event. And so I think there's a lot of learnings, which we had to basically test out a lot of different categories and understand what's working. It was kind of just learning through all the different categories, right? As we came out with new product. We then started talking closer to our customers, I think more around when we were doing our tournaments, because then we were playing with our customers, talking to them throughout the day, getting feedback from them, understanding what they wanted. And now it's like we know that that's such a crucial point, right? Understanding what they want, just like any brand. And we've gone deeper into now sending out surveys and trying to getting more feedback on that. But we really learned too, when we have like really big months, it's made up of like really 25 to 50 SKUs, right? Even though we have hundreds of SKUs on the website. So, we know now we don't have to go as wide. It's all about going deeper, but we definitely tested out so many different categories and so many different product SKUs to really have a good barometer of what's working and what's not.
Yeah, I definitely love when working with you guys at Malbon. I think that your customers do take sort of a central role in how you guys think about product and really everything. But I've always been curious about when you were first starting the brand, how central were they? Because I know now that they're very central to it. But obviously you have to sort of build that community that you guys have today. And it sounds like to me, a lot of that community stemmed from sort of love for the product.
Yeah, I think when you take a sport and you pair that up with product, then you get that community naturally, right? And golf really is a community sport. You're playing it with your friends, right? You're playing in tournaments. Like that whole format was like pre-existing. And it's like a lifelong sport too as well. Like it's not something like football where you hit a point where like you're just too old to get tackled, right? But golf, you can kind of play your whole life. So I think that component just made so much sense for like the whole community side of it. And when we looked at, hey, how do we expand on this? It was kind of natural progression to be like, why don't we start hosting our own tournaments, right? Because if you're a member at a country club, someone invites you to play there like their member guest, maybe you get invited once a year, but it's like, why not like host our own events and bring a bunch of like-minded people together? And if you come to our tournaments, they're like a little bit different, right? They're a lot of people in music and artists and creatives. It's not like your typical, we'll call it golf tournament. And so I think it was just like, let's bring like-minded people together. Let's do something fun. And that allowed us to really just talk to our customers in person and, continue to evolve that side of the business. And now to us, having a golf tournament is like part of our marketing plan. And it's not about like, hey, like, how are we going to make money out of this? It's like, how do we do something impactful where like our customers can experience like what we want, like the DNA behind the brand, and like leave them like feeling excited. And they've now become like almost like brand ambassadors, everybody that comes to our tournament, right? We're having a good time shooting content all day. It's very unforced. Everything's very natural as far as how we're using that content. And I think, yeah, we've been fortunate to kind of have that natural progression versus like trying to make it into like this huge like marketing production where it almost feels like they're showing up to be a part of that. You know, it's just like, hey, everyone's coming to just to have a good time and kind of expand and grow this game as a whole.
Yeah, I think for me, like one of the tough parts whenever my friends ask me to golf is I'm not a good golfer, but I think like one of the things I love about golf is it's a very social sport where you don't necessarily need to go play golf because you love golf. You can go play golf because you love being around your friends and you want a place where you can be comfortable, put work aside. I feel like that's one of the great things about golf and community is they're sort of tied together. Whereas like other sports, I grew up playing college sports, much more physical games where you're not socializing on the field.
What's your handicap?
Yeah, I don't know if we have a set handicap for me. I would say like whatever the max is, probably like -2 from there. So I'm one of those people with golf that, not to get sidetracked here, but I'm one of those people that refuses to get too deep into it because then I'll know I'll go all in and spend my entire time trying to get good at it. So I like to just go like
rip all your time away.
Yeah. So I like to just go like an inch deep, get involved, play with friends, but I don't like to get too involved because then I know I'm going to get super angry if I'm investing a ton of time and I'm not good at it. Whereas now I don't invest a ton of time. So if I'm not good at it, then it's like, well, of course you're not good at it. You're not investing time. So I don't know if what that says about me personally. Probably I just don't like being bad at things, but that's one of the things I do love about golf. And one of the things I think Malbon does really well is they tie this kind of sport element and love for the game with like this social element, this lifestyle element that I think works really well for you guys.
Yeah, I think, golf as a game, it's a very hard sport, right? Unless you grow up like playing it very consistently, it's hard to like maintain, being a good golfer, right? And I think when you come into the sport later on in life and pick it up, it's kind of like it gives you like this new spark of energy, and it's like it can be this place where you can go out and network and build relationships, and if you get hooked, like you're pretty much hooked. And like to your points about why you're not playing it, like it'll suck up a lot of your time, man. But I think for a lot of people, it's kind of like meditative too. You get outdoors, you just kind of like disconnect for a little bit. You don't always have to play 18, maybe you play 9 holes, but it's interesting to see the game evolve and kind of like this new wave of golfers. After COVID, you kind of have this, we'll call it like the new COVID golfer that's just like picking up the game. And I think that's helped us as a brand as well, as kind of having like this whole, new customer profile that's kind of entered into it. And I think for a lot of people too, it's like, it wasn't a cool game back in the day, right? It was kind of looked at as like being a little bit more like stuck up and waspy. And, I hope that we're making it a little bit more like comfortable and, opening up the perspective of it. And I think that's really part of our ethos, is just really inspiring people to, play the game.
Yeah, I think you guys have done a really great job at carving out your own niche within the sport and within the space. I think there's probably a lot of people listening right now who are, whether they're running a company, thinking about starting an e-commerce company, they're marketing, for an e-commerce company. One of the biggest things and challenges that I always hear and I see when I talk to these brands is, there's 100,000, right, sports apparel brands. How do I stand out? How do I establish sort of a community, let alone how do I establish customers, let alone community? What for you guys at Malbon, like what was that trigger point, if there was one, where you were able to kind of differentiate or you were able to stand out? Like what was that for Malbon?
Well, I think in golf, there really was like a void in the space, right? There's no reason for another apparel brand to come out, really, right? There's thousands, to your point, of apparel brands, right? But there really wasn't too much happening in the golf apparel space, right? And that's why, going back, I think what makes us unique, being like a lifestyle brand rooted in golf, being geared more towards, we'll say, like, more of like a fashion forward customer. It really, like, there wasn't much there, right? So I think, now there's a bunch of new brands that have popped up, which is great. It validates the category, and we want that. But I think, we just saw that gray area within the sport, and we were able to kind of, take action,
Yeah. So you think it's a combination of finding sort of some white space along with execution, or how would you kind of summarize what you just said around where Malbon has been able to find success? Because obviously I'm sure there's other brands out there that saw a niche, but they didn't do it effectively. Like, is it kind of the combination of those two things?
Well, look, I think it takes time to really validate it. There's so many times when you're building a fashion brand where you're just banging your head against the wall, and it's like, you don't know if it's going to work, right? But this is definitely, golf is a sport that's growing a lot right now, right? So that's really good for us, and it's good for anybody else, like, entering into space, even if it's not apparel, but just products out of apparel. So I think for us, it was just like staying very consistent with dropping product and learning from our customers, and we just acknowledged really quickly that there was a huge demand for it, right? So we just kept on doubling down, and riding that momentum. I think there wasn't times really where we were seeing like signs of like, hey, maybe we should question this. Like, it was never that at all. It was always like, you know what, like, there's something here. Let's continue to explore it. And in the first couple of years, you just have to really just learn what your customer wants, right? How you have to mature with the market. You can't be so aggressive that there's not a demand yet for what you're doing, and obviously going into categories that don't make sense. So like, what we've learned a lot from our product now is we make too much like heavy product, right? What I mean by that is we don't have enough like performance product. Where in the summertime, like, we're obviously just getting out of summer now, but when it's like 100 degrees out, you don't want to wear a cotton PK polo. You want a performance polo, right? So for us, we're 4 or 5 years, 5+ years into this now, and now we're just really capitalizing on that category, which is a huge one, right? I think a lot of people probably would have gotten to it sooner, but we are always like just being very creative when it comes to our drops, right? They're not your typical, I think, golf drops that you would see from another brand. And that kind of goes back to us being more, like I keep on saying, a lifestyle brand first, and really just riding that momentum.
Yeah. With going back, I guess, to sort of when we first met, which was, I want to say like 2 years ago now, you guys were a much smaller company. Well, I guess not smaller, but you guys weren't as well known. Like today, I can't go around without people knowing Malbon and getting excited about it. But like, let's rewind, to 2 years ago or 3 years ago. Is there any kind of like stories that you have around sort of like the early days of getting excited about knowing you were onto something, or strategies that you guys use to maybe get product into people's hands? Or I don't know. I think maybe there's some stories there that, would love to hear. If there's anything that stands out in particular about, just a way that you guys were able to find traction in the early days, or I guess the other side of that is, was it always kind of there?
Yeah, I'll give you a story when back in the Fairfax days, like very early on, which, you got to be super scrappy back then, right? You have a very small team, basically just had a few people working retail and then us, right? And so you're very hands-on, which I prefer to be. I want to be close to everything that's happening in the very beginning. And when we had our first Nike drop, we basically didn't have enough inventory to support the amount of orders that came in. We thought like, hey, you know what? We could just pre-sell a bunch of product and order everything that they purchased later. But really, we're at the mercy of Nike having inventory and having to do the cresting and all that. It ended up being a long process of like, getting all the orders, making sure we had the product to come in, and it took like months for the customer to get the product and having to cancel orders. But it was like one of those times where I think there's a lot of opportunity with the problem, right? We were faced with a lot of challenge there, but it also validated like the opportunity, through that, right? And I think that's important as you're going through building a brand, is like a lot of people probably could be turned off by that and be like, you know what, we don't know what we're doing. Like, that's it. But it's like, hey, you know what? Let's do our best to keep all of our customers happy. If they're not happy, we'll make it right. And now we validated that, people want more product. So like, how do we, provide a better experience for them moving forward? And, I think we've accomplished that. All right. And that's just one learning very early on that we fixed.
Yeah. I'm almost really like, when you look at people who are a part of your brand now, there's so much passion behind it. We've kind of talked a little bit about where that passion comes from, whether it's tied to the sport, tied to the product, tied to the sort of the community. I want to pivot into how you guys really fostered that community and talk a little bit about Buckets Club, which is essentially your like loyalty program. Can you give the audience an understanding of like what Buckets Club is and then how that sort of got started?
Yeah, for sure. So Buckets Club is actually how you and I connected through that. And prior to Buckets Club, it was called MGC, which is just Malbon Golf Club. And, after COVID, I would say like 8 months into it, once golf like opened back up again, we were like, you know what, let's start bringing people together, and host our own tournaments. And so we charge $300 a year to subscribe to MGC as your subscription fee to be a part of Malbon Golf Club. And at the time, you would submit an application online. We would vet it and then approve it. Most people got approved, very few people we turned away. And then we would host tournaments once a month. I think in the beginning, it was probably like one every 3 months. And then like the goal was always to like do something every single month. And then we capped out at about 500, 600 members, because you got to be in LA for the most part, at least at that time, because we weren't doing any tournaments outside of Los Angeles. So it's a lot, right? If you're in New York and you want to travel to LA to join the tournament. So we kind of capped out there, and we're like, all right, how do we do stuff, even more globally, outside the country, across the US? And then that NFTs like started being a buzzword, right? And I kind of went down the rabbit hole of like understanding really what it is. And I was more focused on like the technology behind it. And then when I learned more about that, I was like, you know what, maybe we could use tokens as a way of having like a digital membership into Malbon Golf Club, right? And then maybe there's things that we can do to amplify that by giving them utility, like with our Web2 commerce experience, right? So for example, offering early access to product drops. So then that basically led me to being like, you know what, how do we dissolve what we've done with MGC, bringing in all those members into Buckets Club and then create this, we'll call it 2.0 version of it, right? So that led into us coming up with the name Buckets Club, which goes back into our iconic character that we have across a lot of our product. We started with our first collection, which was 1,000 tokens, and it sold out within 2 weeks. And I think for us, it was a hard sell, right? We're trying to get people to go in, get Ethereum, mint an NFT, right? And a lot of the people that were loyal customers of ours and the people that would purchase something like this, like didn't even know how to do that. So we had to educate them. So after we sold them out within about 2 weeks, we were pretty happy with it. But then it was like, okay, like we still only have 600 members and now they're spread across the world. Like, how are we going to sell a couple hundred spots? So then we came out with collection number 2, which was 3,000 NFTs. And that was a little bit more of a harder sell. And I think we learned really quickly that, having like a smaller collection is probably better. But we were able to sell all those out. We added on probably like another 1,000 members because people were buying multiple NFTs and our existing members were buying them as well. And then now we're like, okay, how do we simplify this? And something that you and I have been working on really closely is making this very user friendly, right? So how do we take blockchain technology and how do we take the subscription model and simplify that? And what you and I have been working on for a long time is basically rolling out the 2.0 version of MGC, which now you can purchase for $300 a year. You get an NFT, but everything's done via email. You check out through Shopify. You don't have to have Ethereum. It's just us, simplifying it and making it more attainable to somebody who doesn't know anything about that space, wants to be a member. So far we launched that and we're starting slow with it. We still have a very, very engaged community, but it's something that we're taking our time with too, because we don't want to like force it and have it grow too much, right? Like our main core business of what we do is on the product side of the business. And this is like an important part of it. Basically building this community. But we don't have to rush it and make like really, really bullish mistakes to try to grow this into, something that's like too big for us to handle too soon. So I love the organic approach to it. And it's also like being a student to like what's happening in the space and working with, smart people like yourself and being, essential technology partners with us. Without what you've done with Nifty Bridge, it would be very hard for us to have executed a lot of things that we've done. And I think we've been able to basically show people like a whole new way of dropping product, right? I don't think there's really that many examples, at least I can find, where people are actually releasing product on their website and using, we'll call it a digital collectible, to sign in and get early access to it or discounts. It's like taking all the amazing things that the blockchain has to offer and just making it more, I guess, adaptable for just an everyday consumer.
Yeah, I love, obviously working with you guys from an early standpoint when I first started Nifty Bridge has been super helpful for me, just because I think the first thing I realized when I was starting the company was I saw two technologies like yourself. I saw the world of e-commerce and I saw this new world of blockchain and NFTs that I knew would open up doors to traditional commerce experiences. And I didn't know how, but I knew that those two worlds would need to talk better. And I kind of saw exactly what you're talking about with the traditional NFT kind of market where you needed a wallet, you needed crypto, and it was not really accessible for most people. Fast forward 2 years, nobody wants to touch anything with crypto. Right. And so like my focus was always on how can these technologies enhance the user experience? How can they make that connection deeper? How can they give and make people feel like they're a part of the brand that they love, as opposed to how can they make people feel like they own a digital image, or how can they make people feel like they're owning crypto? That was never the point of kind of why I started Nifty Bridge. And I do think working with you guys from an early stage was super helpful in figuring out how can this technology be used? How should it be used, as well? And we're still, really, I think we can agree we're like scratching the surface probably of what's possible. And that's something that I've learned is it's a process, right? Like educating people, new technology takes time. And oftentimes it's the simple use cases that matter the most. Token gating was such a small, and for those listening, Malbon basically, they open up product drops to their ownership club or their buckets club based on, so they'll get first access to their drops. And so that technology is called token gating, but it's essentially just using that token as a key that unlocks early access. But when I was first...
I think a good way of putting it too, just for like a good little example, is like, imagine like cutting the line at like a retail shop, right? I think if you drive by like, we'll say like Supreme, they're like pretty much, they invented like the whole drop lifestyle, we'll call it, and if you see a line outside of like a couple hundred people, like having this token is essentially like cutting that line and having first access to it, right? So taking that to like a digital experience.
Yeah, and I think what was so interesting is that the applications for this technology are, endless, but oftentimes it's the simple ones that matter the most. And so this idea of like cutting a line, it's very simple from a tech perspective, but it was really powerful in terms of an unlock that you could give your community. So it's been really cool, like really excited, obviously, to continue working with you guys on that. There's a lot of people listening that have wanted to do loyalty or have tried doing loyalty, and you guys, I think, have done it really well. It's been very authentic. It's been dynamic. It's always been focused around your brand and your community. Can you talk a little bit about like, where do you think brands go wrong when it comes to launching a loyalty or membership program?
I think the biggest thing a brand could go wrong with is like trying to have some sort of, we'll call it utility, that's like hard for them to actually use, right? Where it's like you might get excited about it, but at the end of the day, it's like, okay, am I really going to use this? Ours is like really simple. It's like we have real world golf tournaments and you can come to them, and that's utility right there, right? We have an active e-commerce website, and we're dropping product all the time. And not everybody will find value out of getting early access, but our most loyal customers do, right? So you got utility there. And then on the other side of it is now having, discounts. Like we have what we call them whales. They own 3, or we'll call them tokens now from our original collection. They get a discount off of every purchase on our website, right? So I think for going back to your question, it's like you just got to make it something that they can use all the time, right? If you overcomplicate it, then they're not going to get any value out of it. And what's the point? So keep it simple and just understand what your customer wants and give them that. That'd be my advice.
Where do you stand on like the points? Because I know that this is always a contentious thing in the space of loyalty is points. Curious to hear like your input on. I know you guys might have. Do you guys have a point system? I don't remember, but I'm curious to hear your take on like point systems and what you think about those.
We don't have a point system. I like the idea of having it and tracking it and being able to basically have them redeem them for rewards or credits toward product. I think that's something with everything we've been doing with with Nifty Bridge and with Buckets Club. Like we didn't want to have to like force that into it. I feel like we have so much happening right now that it was like, okay, I want to circle back. I do want to do it. It makes a lot of sense, but let's roll it out the right way, right? There's a few big players in this space, that have been around for a long time, and I think we have a loyalty program right now with Buckets Club. It's just not a points loyalty program, right? Mm-hmm. It's you owning basically equity within this token that gets you, access and discounts, and a lot of times too, we'll be having special invitational only events like at our stores or something like that. And if you own one of these, you only get access to it, right? So I think there's a lot we're doing already that you would get from a point system without calling it a point system. But I like it.
When it comes to all these different benefits, right, that are kind of built around this program, whether it's a loyalty program, membership program, a lot of the things I hear from brands are that it's sort of this big commitment, because once you kind of turn this on, right, you can't really turn it off if you're doing it right. I mean, even a points-based program, right, like the best ones are always the people that are constantly making it more valuable and it changing. So I want to ask you, for brands that maybe they don't think they can do events, or they don't think they can do, these different community kind of meetups and things like that, what are some other ideas maybe that you have around how they can still foster that sort of community that you guys have built, but they don't necessarily have, the golf branding of it to make that event feel more natural? Like, do you have any ideas around how they can still foster that sense of community within their brand?
Yeah, I mean, like obviously not everyone's in the golf space or like in what's called like the sports space. So coming to some sort of actual event can be hard. But it can be as simple as like, hey, let me like host a dinner at our office and bring in our customers and do something cool and talk to them the whole time and learn from them and do something like that, right? Like every brand stands for something. So you could start like there, right? Just doing something as simple as a dinner, right? And bringing people together. I mean, that'd be one idea. I think for every brand, it's a little bit different. I think when it comes to loyalty point programs, there's not really much you can do, I think, outside of, let's say, that realm, because it's pretty like straightforward as far as what you do there. But I wouldn't be like discouraged with trying to just starting small and hosting your own events that have nothing to do with any sort of sports, right? Just think about how you can bring your customers together and converse with them and learn from them, right? They want to be engaged and understand like what's happening behind the scenes, right? I think clothing is like an emotional connection. That's why you buy it, right? There's no reason to buy more clothes. So it's like, how can you emotionally connect them on some level where they understand what you're doing and foster that, right? So I would just start small there, man, by like just hosting like events at your office if you have the space, or rent space somewhere else.
Yeah, and as you guys have scaled, I mean, sometimes that can feel for brands that are growing that have a lot of people, you know, how can you still foster those kind of personal connections? It sounds like, would you still recommend them, hey, having an event where they can come in? Maybe it's a small gathering. Like, how has Malbon managed to continually keep that tight connection, that human connection, while still growing super fast?
Well, I think with social media, it's really easy to stay connected with your customers. We're responding to every single little DM, and it's just like starting the basics there, right? Everybody that hits us up, we talk to them, right? We respond to them all. If they DM us, we have, you know, actual humans. There's no AI behind it, responding to them and making sure they're good and getting their feedback. So I just use the very obvious tool, right? Like, you don't have to complicate it and do something that's like, you know, outside of like the norm, right? Just use Instagram, use like, you know, TikTok, and talk to your customers and engage with them that way.
Yeah, there's no, you know, secret touch point. I mean, I'm sure some people are looking for like, what is that hidden touch point that Malbon has that no one else has? The reality is you guys are working with the same set of tools, but you're maybe putting more intentionality behind some of those tools. It sounds like with Instagram, that means taking the time to be personalized. With customer support, that means, you know, going the extra mile to make sure they get what they want. And I think that that's ultimately like the answer. It's not, there's no hidden, you know, key to this. It's take what you have, look at what you have. How can you be more intentional with those tools and put the customer at the center?
For sure. I think if you go on our social accounts too, you'll notice we repost a lot of user-generated content. I think people get excited about that. We're not so focused with like everything looking perfect. And if you go back to our Instagram in the very early days, like the content they're putting out now is obviously much more, I think, well-produced, just because we're spending more money because we have more money to do that, right? But in the very beginning, it was like being very scrappy, still reposting everybody. And I think people like seeing the love there. And so I think that goes a long way too, as well, of like engaging your customers, featuring them, which I think everybody's like looking at their social, like it just has to be perfect, everything, right? But I think the more you can monetize that with your customers and show love, you know, the better you'll be off long term, even if it's not perfect.
Yeah, I almost feel like too, not being perfect is people like to see like behind the scenes of like what goes into the, you know, the making of the cake, right? The ingredients. And I think that the more that you let customers in to see that, obviously there's a certain level to that, but I think customers want that. They want to see, you know, behind the scenes. They want to see how the cookie was made. They want to feel like they're a part of this process. And ultimately, you guys building that is what makes people, you know, shout out, hey, I love Malbon. You need to try Malbon, right? Like that's something that other brands don't really have. And I think it stems from this idea of like letting the customers see you for who you guys are. You're not just another, you know, run-of-the-mill apparel brand that's kind of like very inauthentic, or it doesn't have like a rooted story and human element. And a part of that human element sounds like is sort of that imperfection of just embracing what you guys are.
Yeah. Look at, you know, I think with golf too, it's like, it's really hard to have a perfect swing, right? And I think when it comes to like posting content and producing content, you're not going to like, nothing's ever going to be perfect, right? You can always make iterations and tinker with it. It's just about being consistent, right? Just like anything, from getting better as a golfer to in your business. And I think for people listening right now too, like understand, like you have to bang your head against the wall for years. Like the beginning days of Malbon are so different than now, right? Like we were so scrappy. We were asking for favors for everybody. A lot of the people that shot content for us, like did it just as like a favor, right? We were shooting stuff like, you know, at public courses, the back of the retail store. We had like a little putting green, pretty much anywhere, like on the side of the street. Like that's where we started, right? And now we can go in and do something that's much more well produced, but you got to bang your head against the wall for years. And I think for people that want to start an apparel brand, like understand, like you got to know what you're doing. It's a hard business, but if you take the time to learn it, there's a huge opportunity, right? Like people are never going to stop buying clothes. Yeah, I don't think people should get discouraged, but you got to go into it knowing that it's not going to be, get rich quick at all.
Mhm.
Like, you got to really, really take your time. And it's never been about money, right? It's always been about doing something impactful and like creating this new movement. But I think when people from the limelight, they look at like the fashion industry as like this, like a lot of like, a lot of just flexing, right?
Yep.
And I think just important to understand, like you got to be very passionate about what you're doing. You have to understand who your customer is, and you got to be willing to, be relentless. And if you have all that, and obviously that the customers are responding well to it, then you have a chance.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned just, getting scrappy and that it is difficult, because I'm sure some people look at your brand, look at the Malbon brand, and they say, it just comes easy to you guys. Like, everything sell out and everybody's super pumped about it. But what they don't see is, how you got to that point. It wasn't like it was just immediately flips, the switch flips and things just work, right? There was probably a lot behind that, sleepless nights that went into kind of fostering what you guys have today. I want to just quickly touch on the content piece, because this is something I really want to talk about, because my YouTube has been getting slammed with Malbon ads.
On YouTube, okay.
And I need to start.
Like, are they shorts, or are they like
they're
actual...
shorts, and the music is incredible. Like I'm trying to remember the little the hums, like, because I used to hum it.
A lot of time goes into picking those songs.
They're so good. The music in those ads is by far the best music, and I'm not just saying this because you're here. Like, it is the best music I've seen in ads. Like, it makes you feel like really just good, and like you want to get out on a golf course and hang with your buddies. Man, maybe we can play like somehow edited this clip that I'm thinking of, because it's really cool. But I wanted to talk about like the content piece, because that's something that is a secret sauce, I think, for you guys. Just from me, an outsider, looking at ads every day. I'm obviously in your target market. I'm a 28-year-old. I don't necessarily play a ton of golf, but I like golf brands and I like lifestyle apparel. So I get targeted by a lot of these brands. And I think Malbon has a very unique kind of content and feel to it. Can you talk a little bit about like how that came about? Is it just really talented people, or what goes behind creating some of that amazing content you guys have on socials and ads?
So on the content side, really we started shooting on a lot of friends, right? It wasn't like really hiring a lot of models in the beginning. It was just shooting people that were friends. Sometimes it'd be like pro skaters that are friends with Steven, or just, people that we knew in the golf world. And all of our content is I think has like a fun feel to it. It's like a little bit different. It's not going to be your typical golf ad. We'll have a collection like Golf and Tackle, where we'll go out to Florida and like, get some actual guys that are local, that are fishermen that also golf, and we'll just document a day of them going out in the morning and fishing, and then ending the day like playing golf, right? I think that's very relatable. Obviously too, that's like a small little niche within the space, right? People who fish and golf, right? Mm-hmm. I like to think, and then you go into the whole skate community, right? When we're using, pro skaters and, people that are, have been growing up and skating their whole life, that are now avid golfers, and creating content around that, right? So I think it's very, sometimes freestyle, we'll call it, it's not like we're all sitting down and coming up with marketing ideas. It's very much like, so-and-so's in town. Let's shoot this. We're dropping this in a week. And keep in mind, like, we're shooting content 3 times a week. And sometimes we'll shoot content and release the product within 48 hours, right? Like, we're not like sitting back and spending like 2 weeks editing it to make it perfect. Now, if we have a week, we're super happy. We're like, oh my gosh, we can like sit back and select everything and really roll this out nicely. But I think for a lot of people listening to, like, understand, like, time is not always on your side. And most of the time it's because our product might be shipping late from our factories and we just got to figure it out. Like obviously now we'll try to get, all of our reference samples, in the office ahead of time so we can shoot it before we receive our production. But, in the early days, you just had to get scrappy and just create content on the fly. So going back to your question, I mean, we're not really limited on what we want to do. It's not like, hey, we have to do this. It's like, okay, like how can we tell a story through this collection? What does it mean? Who would be a good fit for it? Experimenting with, different people within the golf community that aren't necessarily like, we'll call them, models, but people that represent like the sport and are aligned with like what we're doing.
Yeah. I love that the examples of like these niche communities within your community and kind of giving them a story as well and highlighting that. I think that that's something really unique that a lot of brands probably when they think about content strategy, they know they're like their ideal customer, but do they know how to make them feel like the product was made just for them within that customer segment? And I think that that's something really unique that you guys do that I think a lot of brands could probably learn from, is finding those unique stories where people see it and they hear it and it's like, that's me. Like that's literally me. Like Malbon must be made for me. It's not necessarily that you guys just target people who fish in golf, but it sounds like that's a really kind of part of your content strategy. So wanted to quickly, I know we're coming up on time, but I wanted to make sure, this is probably like the biggest thing that I was interested in talking about, was the partnerships with Malbon. Like, I think that to me is really where you guys crush it. Every week I feel like it's something, I'm working with Van, who is also, on your team, is hearing about some of the really unique people coming to you and saying, hey, can we partner with you guys? How has partnerships played into sort of Malbon and how successful you guys have been? And how do you foster or build sort of that where people are coming to you and asking for partnerships?
Yeah, I mean, everything we've done on the partnership side has been pretty essential to how we built this business, right? And the beauty of a partnership is being able to market to their customer base and also ours, right? And making sure they're not like competing with each other. So going back to like the stories of Nike, that was like our first partnership. Actually, I think we actually worked with Puma right before Nike, but working with like the obvious, like big athletic brands within the space and doing something with them. And then you'll get into stuff that we've done recently with like Undefeated, right? And I think everybody now kind of wants to speak to this, to this space, to this new golf space. And Steven has a lot of relationships from his Frank 151 days, and he's kind of got this like almost like agency mind where, he wants to go out and, spark up some conversations with people he used to work with and on that during those days. And now it's, we're very fortunate to work with like Adidas. We have something, coming out that we can tease right now with tailor-made later this year. We have, cool things happening with, big gaming groups. And there's also like partnerships like we've done with like American Express that are like, very unexpected. I think if you have the opportunity to build those relationships and do something impactful, like everyone should do it, right? It's like, it's an easy way for them to be able to market your brand as well as, for you to do something very impactful. And like Nike has been an extremely valuable partnership for us, and as well as like Adidas, like all of those. And I think, being able to, foster those and continue to, do something, bigger every single time is always the challenge. But I think we've been extremely fortunate to have a lot of really good alliances in that arena.
And for people that are hearing that and thinking, yes, I need to do that, like where do you start with that? I mean, it sounds like a lot of it was the founders kind of having those connections initially. But if you had some advice for somebody who has a growing brand, but like wants to have these partnerships, relationships, like where do they start?
Hit them up on Instagram, email them, figure out who they are on LinkedIn, and just reach out and start their conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Just, understand what they're doing, educate them on what you're doing, and then just see if there's synergy, right? Those partnerships, they take over a year from once you guys agree on doing it to actually roll out. So from when an initial conversation happens, you're looking at 18 months, So I'd say just get out there and write down a list of who you think would, be the right partners, and hit them all up and just see if anything sticks. I understand it's going to take a long time. Like now, like I was saying, like we don't commit to releasing product with any partners for like at least like a year out from when we, start having like the conversation of like, hey, let's do this together.
Yeah, I feel like e-commerce and software are kind of moving closer together when it comes to this sort of partnership ecosystem that a lot of brands like Malbon are doing, where you're creating sort of this moat between your competition by leveraging these partners that are helping you run faster together. And I feel like that's a big part of also software right now. Running Nifty Bridge is a big part of what we do, is right, like partnering with people that can help us service customers better. And I think one of the things that I've learned, and I think maybe this translates to e-commerce as well, is leading with value, as opposed to leading with, because every time somebody reaches out to, whether it's us or reaching out to someone else, there's always that like initial thing of like, what can I get from, what can I extract from you or your brand? And I think when you frame it as like, what can we give to each other? How can I provide value immediately? Maybe it's often it's a good idea to look at your customers and see what brands do they already love? Like where are there already synergies? Then kind of unlocking those doors because there's already value there, as opposed to just trying to drum up this partnership value that doesn't necessarily exist and that comes off as inauthentic. So I think like from a software perspective, I think that's a big lesson I've learned is, how do I provide value as a partner first, and then fostering those relationships over time. And then eventually when the time is right and there's mutual value to be had, right, that's when those things happen. And for you, likewise, it's taken 18 months. So I think that's a big piece that people can learn from, is it's a long process, but to start it, you should think about, how can I bring value to this person or this company? And how can I ultimately, this partnership should bring value to my customers as well.
100%.
So we always like to finish off. Hopefully you don't have are you good with one more question, Bryant?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. So always like to finish these things off. This is technically only the second episode, but always like to finish these conversations off with the people that were snoozing through the first, 30 minutes, or maybe they're just waiting for the short clips. One piece of advice that you would give to marketers or e-commerce founders on really like how they can learn from what you guys at Malbon have done. Any advice that you would give them, or any one key takeaway that they might have for those people just now kind of tuning in or perking up their ears. We'd love to hear it.
I think understanding that there's a sequence of events that need to happen and you can't rush it. Don't try to jump to step 10 before you've completed step 1, right? And that's going back to like the basics and like making sure you're setting up a strong foundation. I think for us, one of the things that has made us successful is staying extremely lean in the very beginning and just making sure every single time that we've had to grow, we've taken action, but we're not skipping ahead too quickly, right? And that could be from using a local domestic manufacturing partner to print on blank t-shirts before you start making them overseas, right? And then fulfilling orders out of your garage before you move over to a 3PL. But understand, as you grow, there's all sorts of things that you can do, but you don't have to rush it. So the sequence of events is super important. And I think being patient through the process is essential. So you have to remind yourself that you don't need to skip ahead. Just stick to the path and be laser focused with precision.
I love that. I think e-commerce right now is hitting a point where there's a lot of brands struggling. And I think a big reason for that is because they maybe tried to skip a few steps. And I could be wrong here, but this is just how I've seen a lot of e-commerce brands that are really struggling, especially the big ones. You probably know who these companies are, but they got a ton of funding. They had some initial success. They got a ton of funding, and now they're struggling to find that profitability. I think when you build a business, the long way, maybe it's harder because you've got to go through all these steps and it takes longer, but you're ultimately building a more sustainable business. I think when you do it that way, where you're learning things along the way that are actually going to carry you to success. And I think one of the biggest things I've learned is the things you learn early on that stink are actually the skills you need when you find success to help you carry that success. And if you skip over kind of that initial part of the scrappiness or just having to like bear down, and you skip that, I think that can also be a challenge for founders and for people that are running a business, because they missed out on this chunk that actually is what helps carry you for the long run. Because eventually, things won't go your way. So I love that you mentioned that, because I think that's a big piece of why a lot of e-commerce brands are struggling today, is because they didn't necessarily go through those initial steps in the beginning to learn the right way to build their business.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going back to like with every problem, there's opportunity, right? And I'm actually kind of shocked too when I see a lot of brands and you actually see how much money they raised and like what's happening. Like a lot of people, they raise a bunch of money, they hire a bunch of people, they really don't know what they're doing, and they don't understand eventually they're going to run out of cash. So it's like you, in the very beginning, understand how important cash flow is and stay lean. And going into like on the marketing side of it, like I used to run all of the paid media myself, right? It's not that hard to do. I learned it really, really quickly, and I got obsessed with it. Now I don't. I have an agency that manages everything for every single channel, and that was part of like the evolution. It makes sense now, but it didn't make sense to have a big retainer with an agency when you're spending less than $5,000 a month. You do it yourself, right? Because those dollars that would go to an agency should be going back to running ads, right? And even if your targeting is not perfect, it's like, who cares? I'd rather have clicks, if not like perfect traffic, than just like overpaying for services when essentially I could do them myself. So you got to be resourceful and understand, like, look at, man, it's like information overload out there. Like spend some time to figure out where your weaknesses are, but also hone in on your strengths. And that doesn't mean you shouldn't build a really strong team around you. Like your team is essential. But as you hire people, be careful in making sure that you're hiring the right people and not too prematurely. You want to bring them into your organization at the right timing to really unload the things that you're doing so you can allocate your time to other things, right? So I think that's super important to acknowledge. Like raising money, I think for a lot of fashion brands, it's like, oh, cool, we're going to get some press on it and all that. But like, look at, you got a lot to keep up there now. And there's a lot you can do without raising a bunch of capital. And yes, money will help, but there's a lot of success stories without raising a lot of money. And I feel like I'm hearing more now these days too, of people that are over raising and then just burning, because once you're a big ship, right, you can sink really easily,
Mm-hmm.
And when you can stay lean and mean, you can just adapt to market change much quicker, right? You don't have a huge payroll. So just be careful as you grow and make the right decisions and build the right team. But then in the very beginning too, make sure you're aligning with partners and people that complement you really well, right? And kind of going back to how, Steve and Eric and I connected. I mean, like there's just it was like a natural, like, relationship that was bonded right there because of our skill sets and how different they are, but how they complemented each other really well. So find people that you can partner up with that can, help you steer your vision.
I love that. Team meets timing meets grit. And maybe those are some of the ingredients for a successful golf lifestyle brand. Well, listen, Bryant, super excited that you were able to join us today. Thank you so much for hopping on. I know that this conversation is especially resonating to me. There's definitely some things that I'm taking away. So hopefully people listening as well can take notice. I know my investors are probably going to ping me after listening to this saying, hey, like, now that, Bryant's saying to cut spending. So, hey, let's cut spending. Yeah, just super. Thanks so much for joining us. This has been awesome. Love what you guys do. Super excited to continue working with you guys. And we're pumped to see what's next.
Thanks, man. Stoked to be here.